Hey guys, tonight we're not starting with a person. We're starting with an object. A fragile one. A book, but not like any book you'd find on a shelf today. Imagine a long, folded strip, like a concertina or a screenfold, made from the softened inner bark of the wild fig tree. Amati, they called it, coated with a thin layer of fine white plaster or lime stucco to create a smooth, bright writing surface. The pages, if you can call them that, were about the length of your arm, and when fully unfolded, the whole thing could stretch for over 20 feet. And on this surface, scribes, who were also priests and astronomers, painted. Not with a quill, but with a fine brush. Their inks were made from soot and ochre, from crushed insects and vibrant minerals, mixed with plant gums to make them stick. The colors were deep, a rich, blackish blue from indigo, a bloody vermilion from cinnabar, a radiant Maya blue, a color so stable we still aren't entirely sure how they made it. The glyphs themselves weren't just letters. They were tiny, intricate works of art. Stylized jaguars and birds, human hands and faces, all combining to form a written language. A complete, complex, and shockingly sophisticated writing system that was, for centuries, the heartbeat of Mesoamerican thought. This was a codex, and in the cities of the Maya, in the heart of the post-classic period, these books were everywhere. Not in huge numbers, of course. The making of one was a monumental task, a blend of artistry, sacred ritual, and profound scientific knowledge. They were kept in libraries, not vast public repositories like the one at Alexandria, but smaller, temple-based collections, curated by the intellectual elite. The knowledge they held was the collective memory of a civilization. Their history, their poetry, their rituals for summoning rain, their meticulous charts of the Venus cycle, their calendars that stretched back millions of years into a past they understood with a precision that would make a modern astronomer raise an eyebrow. And then, they were gone. Well, almost. The story of their erasure begins, as these stories so often do, with a man who was utterly convinced of his own righteousness. His name was Diego de Landa, a name that, in the history of knowledge, deserves to be spoken in the same hushed, horrified tone as the guy who burned the Library of Alexandria. Born in Spain in 1524, he joined the Franciscan order, a group known for its fervor, its absolute, unshakable conviction. He arrived in the Yucatan Peninsula in 1549, a young man ready to save souls. And he was good at it. He learned the Yucatec Maya language with a frightening speed and dedication. He wrote a massive, detailed record of their culture, their customs, their beliefs, a document that would later become one of the single most important ethnographic works we have on the Maya. The irony of this is so thick you could cut it with a flint knife. Because the same man who studied them, who learned their language to better understand them, was the same man who decided that the very heart of their culture had to be annihilated. He saw their codices not as repositories of knowledge, but as manuals for devil worship. The intricate glyphs were not language. They were lies of the devil. The precise astronomical charts were not science. They were sorcery. In his mind, he wasn't destroying knowledge. He was performing an exorcism on an entire civilization. So, in July of 1562, in the town of Mani, he did it. He organized what he called an auto de fe, an act of faith. Sounds so bureaucratic, so official, but let's just call it what it was. A bonfire, a massive, roaring pyre fueled by heresy. And the heresy took a specific form. Wooden idols, yes. Stone carvings, sure. But also, and most catastrophically, books. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. These meticulously painted screenfolds, these 20-foot-long stretches of human genius, were torn, crumpled, and tossed into the flames. The plaster coating would have cracked and blackened. The vibrant inks, the Maya blue, the vermilion, the indigo, would have vaporized in the heat. The Amati paper would have curled and turned to ash, the knowledge contained in its beautiful, devilish script disappearing into the Yucatan sky as smoke. Landa himself wrote about it with a chilling lack of remorse. He stated that the Maya made use of certain characters or letters, with which they wrote in their books their ancient affairs and their sciences. And then, with the bureaucratic calm of a man filing a report, he added, We found a large number of books in these characters and, as they contained nothing in which there were not to be seen superstition and lies of the devil, we burned them all, which they regretted to an amazing degree and which caused them much affliction. Of course they regretted it. Of course it caused them affliction. Imagine someone coming into the British Library or the Vatican archives, dousing everything in gasoline, and lighting a match, all while telling you they're doing it for your own good. It's a level of cultural violence that is almost impossible to comprehend. Landa saw himself as a surgeon, cutting out a cancerous tumor. But he wasn't a surgeon. He was an arsonist in a friar's robe. He was burning a people's memory, their identity, their very connection to the cosmos. And he was doing it with the smug satisfaction of a job well done. But here's the thing about knowledge. The stubborn. It doesn't always die when you try to kill it. The story of the lost libraries isn't just a story of destruction. It's also a story of survival. A few of these codices, through sheer luck or clandestine effort, escaped the flames. They were hidden away, or perhaps sent to Europe as curiosities for kings who had no idea what they were looking at. Today, we know of only 4 Maya codices that are considered pre-Columbian or very early colonial: the Dresden Codex, the Madrid Codex, the Paris Codex, and the more recently authenticated Grolier Codex. For, out of what was certainly thousands, maybe tens of thousands, for lonely survivors from a continent-wide intellectual holocaust. So the question that haunts historians, linguists, and archaeologists isn't just, what was burned? It's, what are we even looking for? How do you reconstruct a ghost? How do you measure the shape of an emptiness? The answer is, you look for echoes. You become an academic detective, sifting through the ashes for tiny, fragmented clues. And your first witness, ironically, is the man who struck the match, Diego de Landa, because after he burned everything, he sat down and wrote his book, Relation de las Cosas de Yucatan, an account of the things of Yucatan. It's a maddening document. It's our single most important source on 16th century Maya culture, written by the man who did the most to destroy it. It's like a firefighter writing a detailed report on the architecture of a building, right after he's finished pouring gasoline on it. In it, he describes their calendar system, their rituals, their daily life. He even included a crude alphabet of Maya glyphs, a misguided attempt by Landa to force their complex, syllabic language into the familiar 26-letter mold of Spanish. It was wrong, of course, deeply, fundamentally wrong. But for centuries, it was the only key anyone had. It was a lockpick made of fog, but it was all we had. And then there are the other sources. The Maya themselves didn't just vanish. They endured. And in the early colonial period, some of them, taught to write their own language using the Roman alphabet by these very same friars, began to write down their own histories. Books like the Popol Vuh, the sacred creation myth of the Kitch Maya, and the books of Chilam Balam, collections of history, prophecy, and medicine from various towns. These aren't pre-Columbian codices. They're written on European paper in a European script. But they are transcriptions, memories, echoes of the older knowledge that was once contained in those painted books. They are the ghost of the library, speaking through a borrowed mouth. And then there's the stone, because while the Spaniards could burn paper, they couldn't so easily destroy every single carved stone stela, every painted mural, every decorated pot. These artifacts are frozen moments. A glyph on a temple wall describing a king's accession. A painted vase showing a scribe at work, his codex open on his lap. A mural depicting astronomical deities and cosmological events. They are the scattered footnotes of a burned book. The task of the modern scholar is to gather these footnotes, these echoes, these ghosts, and try to reassemble the library from its smoke. So let's float over to one of these survivors. The most famous one, the Dresden Codex. It's not in Dresden because the Maya had a presence in Germany, of course. It found its way there through the labyrinthine and often murky channels of 18th century European collecting. It's a battered, fragile thing. You can see where the plaster has flaked off, where the pages are stained, probably from water damage when the library in Dresden was bombed in World War II. Another near-miss in its long, tragic history. But when you look at it, even in a digital reproduction, it takes your breath away. The pages are a grid of red and black glyphs and intricate, colorful illustrations. Deities, animals, numbers. It is, without a doubt, a scientific document, a textbook. And for a long time, that's all we could say. It's beautiful. It's a textbook. But what was it teaching? The breakthrough, the moment the ghost began to speak in a clear voice, came in the latter half of the 20th century. A painstaking, decades-long process of decipherment, led by linguists like Yuri Norisov, a Soviet scholar working in isolation, and later by people like David Stewart and Linda Skeel. They cracked the code. They realized Landa's alphabet was mostly nonsense, but contained a kernel of truth. They realized the writing system was logosyllabic, a mix of word signs and syllable signs. It was like solving the world's most difficult crossword puzzle, where every clue was also a miniature painting. And what the Dresden Codex said, once we could finally read it, was astonishing. It wasn't just priestly mumbo-jumbo. It was hardcore astronomy. It contained incredibly accurate tables for predicting the movements of the planet Venus, which was of immense religious and military importance to the Maya. It had tables for predicting solar eclipses. It detailed complex calendrical cycles, weaving together their 260-day sacred calendar and their 365-day solar calendar into a grand, interlocking cycle that would repeat every 52 years. This was math. Highly advanced, abstract math. This was a civilization that had conceived of the zero, that calculated lunar months with a precision that wouldn't be matched in Europe for centuries, and that tracked planetary motion over spans of time so vast they make a modern cosmological model look short-sighted. So, if the Dresden Codex is a treatise on Venus and time, a kind of Maya Principia Mathematica, what else was out there? What other books burned on Landa's pyre? This is where the detective work gets really interesting, and where we have to start reading between the lines of the few sources we have. The surviving books and the colonial accounts hint at entire genres of literature that are now almost completely lost to us.